This is a presentation for the Winnipeg Philatelic Society, Western Canada's oldest stamp club, and it's about the sale of the Bill Gross collection, or rather part of the collection, at Siegel auction galleries in 2018. Now there were 106 lots. This was the first of 4, and they were sold on October the 3rd, 2018. The sale was expected to bring $9 million, and it brought $10 million even though 3 of the lots did not sell. Now Bill Gross is a financial guy. He worked for PIMCO for a while. He had a huge collection of stamps, and so far he has sold $27 million worth of his collection, and he's donated an awful lot of that to charity. And this was part of selling 4 parts, or rather his U.S. collection in 4 parts. It's thought that it's going to bring $47 million. These lots, this particular section of it, I've looked at the other lots and they're not quite as interesting, I don't think, as this group. The provenance of this is fascinating. They know who's owned these stamps, these covers, from the day they were found. So the provenance is fascinating, and the history, because a lot of the covers in particular tell an interesting historical story. So let's start looking at the covers. The first one is an Annapolis provisional. It's one of 2 known, and it was sent on the 20th of March, 1846. Now the first U.S. stamp was issued in 1847, so this is a year before. The stamp was found in 1896, and I find this interesting because as a stamp collector I always kind of hope that I'll be looking through an old bunch of stamps and I'll find a really valuable stamp from a long time ago. And what this collection, or the sale of this collection, told me is all of this stuff was found a long time ago, at least 100 years ago or more, and the odds then of me finding something are pretty low. Anyway, this is cataloged in Scott for $300,000. The estimate was $300,000 to $400,000, and it sold for $390,000. Next is the New York Provisional from 1845. One of the other things that I love about this, and this is a letter that went from Boston to New York, it's addressed to, I think that's Messrs. Howland and Aspinall in New York. So I assume that's a business in New York, and just sort of to Bill in New York, and the post office knew how to get it to them. The world was smaller in those days. Now there are many varieties of this stamp. This cover's interesting because it's mailed from Boston to New York, and it uses a New York stamp. So people had to be very resourceful. If you lived in Boston and wanted to get a letter to New York, you had to find a way, I guess somebody mailed them to you, to get some stamps to mail your letter. And you'll note, a long time ago, this cost 15 cents. So that's a pretty high price for way back then. Now the estimate of this was $20,000 to $30,000, and it went for $32,500. Next is the Millbury Provisional, also of 1846. This has a bit more of address on it. It says care of Loader and Company, 83 Cedar Street, New York. So making things a little easier for the post office to deliver. It's thought that this image is copied from the portrait on the New York Provisional we just looked at. There are only 19 known, 8 are on cover. Scott catalog value used is $50,000. The estimate of this on cover, given that there's only 8 of them, $300,000 to $400,000, and it sold for $300,000. A lot of money. The St. Louis Twin Bears. Now this is interesting because the Twin Bears, this is 2 stamps that are satinant, they're joined together. And there's a 20-cent stamp and a 10-cent stamp. And it's addressed to Charlie and Whalen in Philadelphia. Now, the reason you can have the stamps like that is this is the way the stamps were printed. And they were printed in sheets of 6. And there were 3 different versions of this sheet of 6. The first was 3 5-cent and 3 10-cent stamps. And then they decided they needed more high-value stamps. So what they did was they scritched out the 5 and put in a 20. And that's where you get the 10 and the 20 variety, where the 2 stamps are still not cut apart. And then after a while they again decided that no, we need more 5-cent stamps now. So they scritched out the 20 and put back in the 5 and printed the same. And there's a dot in the ball of the 5, which I don't think I can quite see. I always have fun when they tell me what the variety is and I can never see it. Anyway, those are the 3 different versions of that sheet. So this stamp, which is only one of 2 pairs known, and it's the only one on cover. And as I said, they were printed on the same sheet, so pairs were possible. And the estimate is $150,000 to $200,000, and it sold for $130,000. Another combination of the St. Louis Bears, this time 120 and 2 5-cent bears, and again to Charlie and Whalen. And the story behind that is there were a large number of these covers found in 1869, between 1869 and 1912, and many were addressed to Charlie and Whalen in Philadelphia. Now, this particular cover is the only known cover with this combination of stamps. So again, it's interesting. Estimate $75,000 to $100,000, sold for $90,000. The Lord Crawford block, 1847. Now, the first thing that intrigued me about this is, why is it called the Lord Crawford block? This is the first issue of U.S. stamps, our friend Benjamin Franklin. And it was once owned by the 26th Earl, so it's now called after him. The 1847 issue was devalued. It was no longer acceptable for postage, so you could take any mint stamps you had back and exchange them for more stamps of the new issue, which you could then use again. So as a result, most unused stamps were turned in, and very few are found in blocks. This is the largest first issue block. Estimate was $200,000 to $300,000, and it sold for $220,000. Another block, this one called the Bible block, also from 1847, also the issue of Turn It Back In. Now this is 60 cents, which I suppose today isn't that much, but back then, that was a lot of dough, and you would want to turn in your unused stamps. This is the largest one known. There are only 3 blocks known, and it was found in the Reeves Family Bible in 1912, hence it's called the Bible block. And this was one of many items once owned by Roihei Ishikawa that was sold in this sale. Now the estimate was $75,000 to $100,000, and it sold for $70,000. Now, Roihei Ishikawa is an interesting guy. He was a Japanese businessman and banker. He was born in 1927, and he had a very large U.S. stamp collection. He got interested in stamp collection as a child. He got interested in it again, and his collection was sold in 1993 at Christie's, and it was sold for $9,200,000 in 1993. A lot of money. Now, one of the points about this, if you're going to invest in stamps, it seems that these stamps, this kind of stamp that's being sold in this auction, are the kind that you want. They are really rare and special. However, Ishikawa apparently probably lost money because of currency fluctuation. So he had this marvelous collection that was worth in 1993, quite a while ago, $9 million, and he lost money on it. So investing in stamps is a difficult enterprise. You better do it because you love it. Ishikawa loved it. So did Bill Gross. Here's another really interesting stamp, being that I'm from Canada. So it has the 3-penny beaver, which is the first Canadian stamp, which was issued on the 23rd of April, 1851. And you'll see this letter is going on the 19th of May, 1851. So not quite a month has gone by since this stamp was issued. And it has both Canadian stamps and U.S. stamps on it. And there's 25 cents U.S. And it's going to Egerton Ryerson in London. Egerton Ryerson was a well-known Canadian educator. And so someone had to get stamps from the United States in Toronto. I guess somebody mailed them to you. We've seen this before. And this paid the postage. And you note that this is to pay the steamer of the 7th of May, 1851. I don't think it made it if it's postmarked on 1851. Or maybe that's the London postmark, not sure. Anyway, you had to really know. You had to know when the steamers were leaving. You had to have postage. And this got you your letter from Ontario to London, England. And so I say Egerton Ryerson was in London. He was a prominent Ontario educator. Ryerson University is named after him. And this made the Cunard sailing of the side-wheel steamship Asia, thought to be sold for $600,000 to $800,000, and it didn't sell. A Postal War cover. Another interesting little bit of history from 1847. It's going to Gand, or Ghent, in Belgium. And it has to pay an extra 30 cents as well as the nickel. And again, you see it's mailed to Boston for the steamer Niagara. So again, if you wanted to get a letter mailed, you had to kind of know when the boats were leaving. So mail was subsidized, and there was a fight for who could subsidize the mail more between the United Kingdom and the United States. And so the UK imposed a penalty on letters from U.S. vessels. It was a retaliatory rate. So the 30 cents pays the retaliatory rate. The cover was once owned by Sir Nicholas Waterhouse, who was the son of Edwin Waterhouse, both of whom were with Price Waterhouse. Estimate 300 to 400,000, and it sold for 190,000, a little less than the estimate. Now this is a block of the Type 1A Franklin, and it's the only known block of the Type 1A, which was issued in 1851. And because it was a large design, it was difficult to print, had to be re-engraved many times, so many varieties were created. And as I said, it's the only known block of Scott Type 1A. A single stamp is worth $13,000. So the estimate was 75 to 100, and it sold for $100,000, right up at the top. This is a Type 1B first day of issue cover from 1851. That's kind of amazing, and it's kind of an accident that it happened, because I don't think people thought of first day covers back then. They certainly do now. And this one just happens to have survived. First day of issue. So it's a first day cover. It's the only known cover. It's got 5A with a catalog value of 10,000. Estimate was 75 to 100. Sold for 125. The only known imperfect block of the 1851 Jefferson stamp. This is another stamp that was once owned by Ishikawa. It's the only known block. There was no postal use for a 5-cent stamp. So what did you do with it? The estimate was 200,000 to 300,000, sold for 260. Here is somebody actually using it, and we're trying to come up with enough stamps to get from the United States to the United Kingdom, in this case Scotland. And in this case it's going to Chivas, the people that make scotch. And so we have 4, 5 cent, a 3, and a 1 to make up the rate. And as I said, there's no specific postal use for the 5 cent Jefferson. Few uses. And so the only time you'd use it is in this type of circumstance, which is why it's the only known cover with this 5 cent stamp on it. So it was used to make up the 24 cent rate, thought to be sold for between $75,000 and $100,000, and it sold for $110,000. The Colossus, the largest imperfect block, George Washington. And isn't that a beautiful block of stamps? From a long time ago, and it's really nicely canceled. Now when you get a block of stamps that big, they're roller canceled or something horrible. But that's really quite a pretty block. This is another thing that was owned by Ishikawa. It comes from Columbia, California in 1857. As I say, it's an amazing condition for a stamp from 1857. That's a long time ago. Thought to be sold for between $75,000 and $100,000, and it sold for $95,000. Cover to Sweden, and again, in 1856, I guess the post office just knew who everybody was, because it's just got the guy's name, Henry Hogström, something like that, Sweden. And I guess the post office found him. 3 10-cent stamps, 1 12-cent stamp. There's one Type 4 Scott 16, which is a catalog value of $1,750, and a double recut. Thought to sell between $50,000 and $75,000, sold for $50,000. The only known unused block, and this is a color variation from 1857, now perfect. Only known unused block, and it was thought to be a printing error. Between $400,000 and $500,000, sold for $400,000. My goodness. Look at the size of that block. Block of the 1859 10-cent Type 5 stamp. Isn't that beautiful? Engraved stamps from a long time ago were really rather pretty. Largest block known has the sheet selvage and the plate number. $50,000 to $75,000, sold for $60,000. This is interesting. The Transcontinental Railroad wasn't finished by 1860, and so this was an advertising cover or a propaganda cover. We want to get a railway to take us across the Rocky Mountains to get the mail, and it's going to Stade, which is a long way away, so 30 cents, but it has to go overland by mail stage from Los Angeles. And it says they're in hope of the, and Transcontinental Railroad is what the picture means. So from February the 17th, 1860, went by stagecoach. Mailed to Germany, and without a railroad, you either had to physically cross Panama or Nicaragua, or go by stagecoach. The last spike in the railroad in the United States was 1869, and this went in 1860. So still 9 years before the railroad goes through. Civil War was 1861 to 65, and that sort of, I think, delayed the completion of the railroad. Last spike in Canada, 1885. It was delayed for other reasons. But the thought was that this cover would sell for between $15,000 and $20,000, and it went for $15,000. What a beautiful lot of stamps. This is the Newbury cover, who is a collector who once owned it. The interesting stamp is the 90-cent stamp. That's George Washington. And the United States issued a series of 90-cent stamps, and there was really no particular use for them, other than to make up a large amount of postage, and this is $1.32. And so it's going to Edwin Howland in Port Elizabeth, Cape of Good Hope, and it's going via London, via England, via Persia to the Cape of Good Hope. So, interesting lot of stamps, very pretty stamps. As I say, there were several issued. They're all rare. They're all hard to get because there was no use for them. The 1860 stamps were demonetized due to the Civil War, and few were used, and only 7 of the 90-cent stamps are on covers. And as I said, this went from England to Persia to the Cape of Good Hope, also part of the Newbury collection, then bought by Ishikawa, thought to be worth between 300,000 and 400,000, and sold for, did not sell. A signed Pony Express cover. And this is going from St. Joseph, Missouri, which was one end of the Pony Express, to San Francisco, which was on the other. And it's signed by the owner of the Pony Express, and it's free. So that's interesting. The Pony Express only lasted for 18 months, despite the fact it's, in popular history, it's very popular, but went from April 1860 to October 1861. When the telegraph finally went through, it went bankrupt. And one of the co-founders was W.H. Russell, and he signed the cover. St. Joseph, Missouri to California. It was one of the last covers before the Paiute War closed that particular route in May of 1860. So 75,000 to 100,000. Sold for 150,000. That one did well. Here's another Pony Express cover, and because it's going to Canada, or what became Canada in 1861, you see this also has a Pony Express stamp, which is a $2 stamp. That's a lot of money. And it's going to Agnes McFadden in Charlottetown. We would now put that all as one word, Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, BNA, British North America. I've never seen it referenced on a cover like that. So we have 15 cents of postage and $2 of Pony Express fee. And there's the guy riding like mad with the mail. The other interesting thing is, and there are many interesting things about this, is the only known cover, Pony Express cover, to Prince Edward Island. There are only 6 known that go beyond the United States. This is one of them, and they're all in the Siegel catalog. You can still go get it, I think, from their website. I referenced the website at the end of the presentation. The other interesting thing, it left San Francisco May the 29th, 1861, and went 1,900 miles or 3,100 kilometers to St. Joseph, Missouri, which was north of Kansas City, still is north of Kansas City. It arrived there on June the 9th, 1861, and by June the 17th, it was in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. Took a total of 20 days by horseback, by steam train, by steam ship to get across to Prince Edward Island. 20 days. I've had mail in the last little while from the United States that's taken up to 40. So we need to bring back the horses and the steam trains. It's only one of 4 with a Pony Express stamp on it, that red stamp in the corner. Thought to go for between $300,000 and $400,000, and it went for $300,000. A Civil War sanitary cover. The Sanitary Commission was to raise money for soldiers injured in the Civil War. And so the stamp down on the bottom left there is a 10-cent fundraising stamp, or Cinderella, I guess. June the 15th, 1864. We have a 3-cent George Washington stamp used to mail the letter. So it's a fundraising letter and a decorative engraved cover. There's an injured soldier being helped. And this was the Great Central Fair in Philadelphia in 1864. So the 10 cents and postage, 30 to 40,000, and it sold for 45,000, above the estimate. Another interesting stamp. It's the only known Civil War cover with that 30-cent Franklin stamp on it, and it's got enough postmarks on it to tell the whole history, because it's going to end up in Paris in the end. It's a 30-cent rate to get to Paris. And it goes from Confederate Nashville to Union Lewisburg on August the 7th, 1861, just as the Civil War is beginning. And it was just a few days before the mail exchange between the North and the South ended, and to stop them from being used in the South, all the old stamps were demonetized. So this stamp could have been used in this way for maybe a week. Very unusual usage and a very historical usage. So 50 to 75,000 sold for $95,000. Folk art cancels. Now, I'm not sure how pretty I think these are. We have a man with a pipe, an elephant, a man with a hat. He's actually a firefighter. You can see the BF logo on his hat. A dog, a woman in a bonnet. It's hard to kind of see her. She's facing right. And then we have a man facing left. So, okay. J.W. Hill, Waterbury, Connecticut. The first two were from him. They're postmarked Waterbury, Connecticut. He was the most prolific. He just had a lot of fun coming up with folk art cancels. And it was thought these would sell for between $5,000 and $40,000 each. I was inspired to go and look at my duplicates of that era and see if I had any of those. A, I don't have any duplicates of that era, and B, no, I don't have any of those. I was even more inclined to go look again when I saw what they sold for. The man with the pipe thought to be between 30 and 40 and went for $67,500. The elephant on the cover, 30 to 40, and went for $37,500. The fireman, it has a tear in it, 3,000 to 4,000, went for $13,500. The dog, 2 to 3, went for $5,500. The woman in the bonnet, 2 to 3, went for $3,000. And the man, 5 to 7, went for $16,000. So, wow, I wish I had a few of those, but of course, one of my rules is if there's a valuable stamp, I don't have it. And I didn't. The pictorial issue with an inverted center. Soon as they started printing stamps anywhere in the world in two colors, it would so happen, I guess, that during the printing process, after one of the colors had been printed, the sheet would be turned around. So when the second color was printed, the center, it would appear inverted. Now, we don't know whether the black was printed first or the green was printed first, so it could be that the center isn't inverted, it's the frame that's inverted, but it appears that the center is inverted to us. Now, this stamp was first found in Liverpool in 1888 and sold that year. It was on a package with two other inverts. There is a long provenance. They know who owned this stamp from 1888 to date. It was exhibited in 1889 in New York by William Thorne and in 1897 in London. Ishikawa also owned this. He wanted to include it in an exhibit, so he owned it at one time. The estimate was $750,000 to $1 million, and it sold for $625,000. Another cover, another fight between countries. So we have a 10-cent U.S. stamp, and that's Napoleon III, who had declared himself Emperor of France. You can see it says there, Empire Français. And so somehow or other, we got in New York 40 centimes of French postage to include on this letter because they were having a postal fight. And now this letter in 1870 actually has a street address on it in Bordeaux. So you're surprised. You know the early stamps of France and the early stamps of the United States, but to have them both on a cover together is kind of unusual. The postal agreement between France and the United States expired in 1870, and so there was no way to prepaid letters. This goes New York to Bordeaux in February 1870. The 10-cent rate was to a non-treaty country, and most of the covers that arrived in France were postage due. But whoever sent this one was smart enough to get the French postage, and it wasn't postage due. And this was just before the outbreak of the Franco-Prussian War, 1870 to 1871, which saw Napoleon captured and deposed and went to exile in England. Estimate was $50,000 to $75,000, and it sold for 42,500. Another interesting letter, another interesting bit of history, fighting about postage rates. It is to Marseille. It is going by the city of Brussels. I assume that's the name of the ship. Via Marseille. So I assume they intended to go through the Suez Canal, which was just open at that time. And the Marseille rate was 42 cents. 30 plus 12 is 42. But you can see it's stamped 26. So the New York postal agent stamped it 26 in error, which is not the Marseille rate. And we're trying to get a letter from New York to Yokohama, Japan, and there's kind of the simplest way to do it. Otherwise, you'd have to go through around Cape Horn or some complicated way to get from New York to Yokohama, Japan. So it goes really a rather long way around to get there. But it's 26, even though there's 42 cents in postage. So, to Japan, December 1869, it is one of only 3 covers known with the 30-cent stamp on it. The Suez Canal opened in November of 1869, so it makes the Suez Canal by a year. The Panama Canal didn't open until 1914. It correctly pays the Marseille premium of 42 cents. It's quicker but more expensive. But the New York clerk, in error, stamps it 26 cents. The British office in London, in error, refuses the Marseille route. So that's an interesting little story of history and postal distribution in 1869. Thought to sell between $50,000 and $75,000, and it went for $90,000. Probably because of the interesting history. A pictorial inverted block. Wow, is that pretty? Estimate 300 to 400,000. It's the largest multiple invert, and it sold for $400,000. Trans-Mississippi cover, all the values. And I looked at this and I went, wait, they're missing the $1 value. The 10-cent value is where the $1 value should be. But the person who put the stamps on has put them on right to left. I would do left to right. I would start with the 1-cent stamp where the 8-cent stamp is, and so on. But once you realize it's kind of, in my view, I'm probably wrong, backwards, you go, yep, they're all there. And so British North America, something or other of British, G.A. Hoare of British North America, 3 Clements Lane, Lombard Street, London, England, and registered from New York to London. So they've got more than enough postage on that. The $1 Cattle in the Storm stamp is supposed to be the most beautiful U.S. stamp. I don't know. It's certainly a very pretty stamp. Estimate between 40 and 50,000, and it sold for. There's only 3 covers like this, 40 to 50,000. Went for 40. This is an interesting stamp. It has to do with the Shermack stamps, and it's one of only 4 known used in this way. And it's imperfect. And the story is, it's from 1908. It's imperfect. 10,000 stamps were delivered to Shermack, and they were to be cut into the Shermack hole coils for mass mailing of advertising and vending machines. This was the first automated postage machine where you could stick stamps on letters at a high rate of speed. 50 of the stamps were acquired by a collector, and he used them. This is one of 4 covers. Thought to be worth between $75,000 and $100,000, and it sold for $130,000. Woohoo! And one of 2 vertical coils, Scott 321, only about 4,000 were produced. 2 are known on covers, one which had some stamps removed, and so thought to be worth $150,000 and $200,000. The second known cover may be lost. Sold for $260,000. Hawaii, 1851. Only unused of 15 known. It's not a particularly pretty stamp, but it's very historical, and there's not that many of them. It was first sold in 1921 for $14,700. It was in Life magazine in 1954, valued at $20,000. There is a long provenance. It was featured in the movie Charade, thought to be worth between $500,000 and $750,000, and it sold for $525,000. That's a lot of money. Anyway, that is not all of the stamps that were sold in this particular auction. If you want, you can go to siegelauctions.com and maybe you can still get a copy of the auction catalog. There are other very, very interesting stamps, but I think I've gone on long enough. You could also go to stampauctionnetwork.com. They had the catalog and also participated in the auction. So, like I say, very interesting lot of stamps that Bill Gross sold. So, thanks for listening.